r/askreddit. What do you think is the most interesting psychology phenomenon? How I can have a surprise in my dream. Like something will happen and I'll be confused about it, then someone will explain it by giving new information, and then it makes sense. But all of this is created by my own brain while I'm dreaming. How can I reveal new information to myself to explain something? If you get yourself to be really happy and excited to see other people, they will react the same to you. It doesn't always happen the first time, but it will definitely happen next time. Time and again this has always worked fine for me. The Troxler effect. A psychological phenomenon where if one is put into a dimly lit room, then look at their self in the mirror for an extended period of time, they will see things in the mirror, but only the mirror. It is caused by the human brain being able to only experience so little at a time. There are things you aren't paying attention to and therefore don't experience. For instance, your blinking pattern or how the air feels, your brain deems it irrelevant so it just cuts them off to process other stuff. When in the dimly lit room looking at the mirror, your brain deems stuff in the mirror irrelevant and just simply removes it from your sight. But it still has to put something there, but because it's irrelevant and doesn't know what to put there, it tries its best to fill in that void and in doing so, makes something weird happen. I'm pretty sure there was an instance where someone tried this, and their mouth stretched out across their cheeks. The brain didn't know what to put on the cheeks because it was deemed irrelevant so it tried to fill the gap and failed. One of the most popular cases of this would be Bloody Mary. This could also happen without a mirror. Ever just be in your room and out of the corner of your eye you see something looking at you, peeking around the door, but when you focus on it, nothing was there. That would be the Troxler effect. Denial. The many answers to evade the truth are very creative. Why do people have favorites? Like a favorite color or a favorite flower? For me it is the unconscious mind and the fact that it accounts for the majority of our cognitive activity. I think it's interesting how we can simultaneously both know and not know things. It is also interesting, and perhaps even frightening, that we are not running the show to the extent that we think we are, at least not consciously. The gambler's fallacy, specifically, how the same series of events can lead to two different conclusions. Assume you have a perfectly fair coin, you toss it 5 times and get 5 heads. You then ask 2 people what they think the 6th toss will be. Person A thinks that heads is obviously on a roll, so he bets on heads. Person B thinks that heads has happened too many times, which means that tails is to come up, so he bets on tails. They're both wrong. The odds of the 6th throw remain the same, regardless of what happened in the past. Note that this only works if the coin is fair. Synesthesia. This happens when you experience one sensory stimulus and it triggers another. For example, you hear a splash and think of the color blue. I get this quite vividly with tastes. If I see a plastic fork, I always taste ketchup for some reason. If you're talking to someone intently and you hand them something, more often than not they'll take it. Doesn't matter if it's a book, a pen or an orange. No idea what the phenomenon is called or if it's even psychological, but it's made for some great pranks. Folie à deux. That 2 people can have the same shared psychosis or better yet hallucinations is just insane. The transference there, as a psych major this one gets me. I'm going to psych nerd out a bit, since I did research on this phenomenon, but facial information processing errors associated with depression are super interesting. Folks with major depressive disorder, MDD, are actually way more likely than their peers to misidentify and selectively focus on emotional responses from other people. But they have a much higher risk of misperceiving neutral faces as negative, and for missing facial cues that indicate positive information. At the same time, folks with MDD are also much better at noticing negative facial emotion indicators. Similarly, people with anxiety disorders tend to be much more likely to see neutral faces as angry. I find it really interesting because it shows how a mood disorder like depression is way more complex than we sometimes give it credit for. Information processing problems can be triggered by, and in turn reinforce, someone's depression. If we focus just on mood as our metric for what constitutes recovery, we miss some really interesting and potentially useful ways to provide treatment. How people who hate themselves hate people who like them. We tend to hate people that have the same flaws and make the same mistakes as we do. Cognitive dissonance. If our actions don't match up with our opinions, beliefs, wishes, etc., something will give and either our actions will change or our mindset will. Doesn't sound very interesting until you use this to hack your life in a sense. Ever heard of the law of attraction? It's kind of like this. The law of attraction claims that if you want something, just pretend like you already have it. Envision that you have it and you live it. Want to lose weight? Envision you at your ideal weight every night. Sounds like complete BS, and in a sense it is, but it applies to cognitive dissonance, and if you play your cards right it works. For me, I was a very shy person. I wanted to become talkative and get friends and guys. So, I would tell myself, I'm not shy. People love me. I have tons of friends. My beliefs did not match up with my actions. I wouldn't talk to people, but eventually something gave and I started to act in accordance to my beliefs. Either you will give up on pretending or you will become how you believe yourself to be. Something to think about. Law of attraction isn't a proven thing, but cognitive dissonance is. The effects of a person's environment, expectations and upbringing on schizophrenia. Specifically schizophrenics that hear voices hallucinate. In a lot of societies, these voices are usually aggressive, dark, cruel, or they simply torture the one experiencing them, calling names and undermining them. In others, usually more spiritual societies, the voices are calm, benevolent and actively trying to help the listener. It is thought that this is the result from how those societies see the schizophrenic. In most, it's seen as a horrible mental disease, in popular culture and media even dangerous. This stigma gives the person involved a negative view of their mental condition, and causes them to internally demonize it. And exactly that creates the evil voices. They believe it is negative, so it becomes more negative. After all, the voices are a figment of their own imagination. In some cultures, schizophrenics aren't labeled that, but are seen as shamans or priests, or a gifted person with a strong spiritual connection. The voices are interpreted as guides, deceased ancestors, or even God self. They don't perceive it as an evil, so the voices do not become evil. The person hearing them doesn't suffer that much from it. Of course, feeling a sense of grandeur because of your mental state is also not a healthy thing, but for the one involved it is a better alternative than being tortured by voices, telling you you're trash or that you should do horrible things, or just screaming, making noise. It can be treated with antipsychotics, to a certain degree, but it would be lovely if one day we as a society could look at schizophrenia in a more healthy manner, so that those who have it aren't as plagued by it, because they have a more neutral view of it. I hope it is possible, someday. Cute aggression. I always thought the link between cuteness and violent urges was ironic. Every time you see something extremely cute, something in your brain says I have to squeeze its little head off. False memories. How you can implant false memories in someone over time, and they believe they are real and their reactions are based on their own reality. Cotard delusion, aka walking corpse syndrome, where the sufferer genuinely believes that they are dead, don't exist, or have no internal organs. Absolutely crazy. I can't imagine what it feels like walking around feeling actually, genuinely dead. Phantom limb syndrome, the ability to feel sensations and even pain in a limb or limbs that no longer exist. Phantom limb syndrome is characterized by both non-painful and painful sensations. Non-painful sensations can be divided into the perception of movement and the perception of external sensations, exteroception, including touch, temperature, pressure, vibration, and itch. Pain sensations range from burning and shooting pains to feelings of tingling pins and needles, while phantom limb syndrome occurs only in amputees. Phantom sensations may be perceived in people who have survived strokes but lost function of certain body parts, or who have spinal cord injury or peripheral nerve injury. Phantom limb syndrome was first described in 1552 by French surgeon Ambroise Paré, who operated on wounded soldiers and wrote about patients who complained of pain in amputated limbs. The same syndrome was later observed and noted by French scientist, mathematician, and philosopher René Descartes, German physician Aaron Lamos, Scottish anatomist Sir Charles Bell, and American physician Silas Weir Mitchell, who tended to wounded soldiers in Philadelphia during the American Civil War. Scottish physician William Porterfield wrote a first-hand account of phantom limb syndrome in the 18th century, following the amputation of one of his legs. He was the first person to consider sensory perception as the underlying phenomenon of the syndrome. The placebo effect. The idea that belief in something can actually have a positive impact on the body just seems so crazy to me. Also helped me realize inversely why stress and anxiety can take such a toll on you. Planning fallacy. We always believe that things will take less time than they do, even when we've done this activity before. It's very strange to me. The irrationality of humans when it comes to some basic decision making. For example, imagine you wanted to buy a nice pair of jeans, so you go to the store and find a pair you really like. The price is $60. Before you buy it, you check your phone and find out a store 15 minutes away has the same exact pair for $20. Would you make the drive and go get the cheaper pair? Most people say yes, they would. Now imagine that you've saved up a bunch of cash and are gonna go to the store for a nice refrigerator. You find the one you like for $2,440. Before you buy it, you find the same exact one 15 minutes away for $2,400. Assuming you couldn't price match, would you make the drive out for the cheaper one? Most people surveyed say no, they would not, despite being the same amount of savings. Most people, when asked why they would drive out for one and not the other, cite the relative difference in price, but this is an irrational behavior. Irrational behavior would dictate that it shouldn't make a difference. Regardless of the relative savings, $40 extra in your pocket is $40 extra in your pocket, and that's all that should matter to a rational being. I'm amazed at the number of people who freeze in a disastrous situation like a sinking ship. People who survive tragedies like that always report that there's not nearly the amount of panic and confusion that you'd expect. A lot of people freeze in place and simply can't move, even as the water is rising around them. Families have been split up in situations like this, where two of them can move, but the other three can't. How fans of opposing teams, from the same country, can hate each other with such passion. Hate that boils over to reasons completely unrelated to the teams or the sport itself. Furthermore, when the fan's team wins, the fan translates the team's success into personal gain, most often taking on a smug attitude. Head down to the Ole Miss vs Mississippi State game this year and you can cut the tension with a knife. I'm not sure if it counts, but sleep paralysis is really interesting to me. I've read it could be linked to mental health and other factors. When Japanese tourists go to Paris, see how not romantic it is, and have crippling panic attacks. Stockholm Syndrome is pretty interesting. You probably all know what it is already, but for anyone who doesn't, it's when a victim of kidnapping falls in love with their kidnapper, and it's more common than you think. Childhood amnesia. The fact that up until a certain point you don't remember things. My first memory isn't until I was 6. My wife's is when she was 2. Hers seem to be emotionally based, so they're sparse and fleeting. Mine are like I just suddenly had a switch flipped, and there I was. Dissociative fugues. They are pretty rare, but the idea of the brain just shutting down and allowing for reversible amnesia is so fascinating. There are documented cases of people disappearing for years at a time and starting whole new lives and not remembering anything about their past. The amount that the words we use and think in changes how we act. People who speak Spanish are less likely to blame someone for dropping something, because the language is the thing was dropped rather than you dropped the thing. Australian Aborigines have no words for left, right, etc. Instead they use north, east, south, and west. As a result, they almost always know what direction they are facing, even inside buildings with no exterior view. Deaf children in Africa using a made-up sign language had not developed signs for describing positioning, under, over, to the right of, etc., and when tested, they could not find a hidden object, even when they watched it be hidden. They couldn't tell themselves in their own minds where to look for it, and so they couldn't find it. The bystander effect. Everyone thinks they would help if something happens, but the effect says that the more people there are, the less someone is going to help. Dreaming. Even though everyone does it, it's amazing that our minds create virtual realities for us nightly. If you can lucid dream, it can be more entertaining than any game technology has invented. Right now, how psychology influences elections and political affiliations. Some of it is really depressing, like name recognition or even a candidate's last name have an effect on how people vote. I wish I still had the study, but it found people like to select simple last names. So Joe Smith will beat out John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt. Policy is irrelevant. Locus of control. Lock. Lock basically is how you view control over your own life. People either have an internal lock where they believe they have the power to control their own lives, or an external lock where you believe everything in life comes from a source other than yourself. I got fired because my boss hates me. I was late because traffic, etc. Now, what's interesting is that studies have shown people with an internal lock find greater satisfaction and success in almost every aspect of life, except one, being in a nursing home. Drives internal lock people crazy while external lock people thrive. Deja vu. To have such a strong feeling that an instance has happened before is crazy. Like you experienced it in the past, or dreamed of it. The Mandela effect. Somehow it's possible for a very large amount of people to have a shared memory of a certain thing while everyone else has a completely different, but still shared, one. Biggest example is the whole Berenstain Bears situation. Pibok or Arctic hysteria, which exists mostly among Inuit living in the Arctic region. Sufferers often become agitated, shouting and tearing off their clothes before running naked in the freezing temperatures. This continues for hours until they collapse and sleep. They have recovered by the time they wake up and may not remember the event. Interestingly, this illness also affects sled dogs and non-Inuit people. The repression of traumatic memories. Narcissistic personality disorder. This disorder is so insidious that its very nature is to convince the sufferer that it doesn't exist, and that everything is great. While that person ruins lives and destroys families. You couldn't even design something so terrible. Playing. When two animals play with each other, they both communicate aggression, they show fangs, claws, they bite, they go for the neck, etc. Everything about it should communicate danger, but they never feel endangered, even when one animal accidentally hurts another. This happens even when animals are playing with animals they have barely known for some time. It blows my mind how the right context completely transforms all the communication between animals who play. How laughter affects people. Laughter is basically the yin to stress's yang, which inspires me to make people laugh when I can, as I don't know what they're going through. Laughter increases things like dopamine, and can even help soothe physical pain sometimes. Dissociative disorders. A dissociative disorder is a mental disorder that involves experiencing a disconnection and lack of continuity between thoughts, memories, surroundings, actions and identity. People with dissociative disorders escape reality in ways that are involuntary and unhealthy and cause problems with functioning in everyday life.